Hello, everybody. It's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Caroline Goodall. For decades, Caroline Goodall has been a very successful actress, starring in many high profile films and TV series. Her impressive list of credits includes Hook, Schindler's List, Disclosure, White Squall, The Princess Diaries, The Cold Light of Day, The Berlin Station, CSI Vegas, and many more. In addition to her achievements as an actress, she also wrote and adapted the screenplay for her most recent film, The Bay of Silence, which she also co-produced. It is my pleasure to welcome Caroline Goodall.
Hi, thank you so much. Great to meet you.
It's great to have you on my show. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule to chat with me today. Caroline, by 1993, you had already starred in two Steven Spielberg films, Hook and also Schindler's List. Could you please tell me a bit about the process of working with Steven Spielberg and the acting experience on these major and popular films?
Oh, with pleasure. How long have you got?
I've got some time.
um, I, I'll try and encapsulate it. One thing, it does seem like yesterday, and now when you look, you say 93. It's extraordinary, isn't it? I actually went to the 25th anniversary of Schindler's List at Tribeca Film Festival in 2018, and it was the first time that I had seen it again on the big screen since the premiere in Washington, when in fact Bill Clinton and Hillary were sitting behind me. And it just hit me again how important it is to see these masterpieces on a big screen with an audience. And there we were in this huge auditorium in New York, and Stephen was there, and Liam, and Ben, and Embeth. And don't think I've ever been so blown away and so proud of being part of something that has made movie history. And then we all got up afterwards and sat on the stage and talked about it. So Stephen talked about his process and about the movie. For me, all I can say is that I am just so grateful to this genius for finding me at that particular moment in my life and in his directorial career to play these two characters. One, of course, was Moira Banning in Hook, which is this beautiful, upbeat imagining of, the Peter Pan story. And then to be asked 2 years later to play Emily Schindler in what, of course, became his greatest film. And in terms of Stephen's process, he said, remember always, it's motion picture. And when you see him as a director, you see him always moving the camera. And his camera tells the story along with the action and the movement of the actors. And that is what creates that alchemy and that, which moves you. And quite often in the Spielberg film, you say, I don't really know why I'm feeling this, but I suddenly am. I'm crying. What is it? And it's just the choices he makes and the way he slowly moves that camera, whether often very close towards someone's face, or he'll start on one person's face and then just move around very gently until he's on the other person's face and they're sort of sitting side by side. And it's just remarkable watching him put those shots together. And there aren't many directors that I've come across who just have that natural ability to tell stories. Of course, he is a genius. He's able to compartmentalize as well in an extraordinary way. And I do remember he is always working on another project at the same time as he's doing yours. So whether he's prepping something or he's looking at a rewrite, or famously on Schindler's List, he was flying back to Paris to edit Jurassic Park. I just think, how do you encompass all of that at the same time. But he was able to, and perhaps for him it was a release valve, to go into the edit for Jurassic Park while he's so intensely focused on every minutiae of, humanity, and the terrible things that happened. Perhaps that was for him a saving grace. It allowed him to have that perspective. Schindler, as he said, was my first grown-up movie. I do have a little tiny fun anecdote if you have time. As I was leaving to hop on the plane to go to do Schindler, I get a call from Amblin. And they said, would you take a parcel with you by hand? It does need to go by hand. And I said, well, of course. So they dropped it off, and it wasn't very big. And they said, it has to go, with you. So I put in my hand luggage. We have to, I think we changed at Munich, and then I get a hot plane that took me to Krakow. And I'm actually not very good traveling. I leave everything. I will leave scarves, bags, coats, you name it. So I do remember I had this moment when, I'm pulling everything down, and I suddenly went, oh my God, I mustn't forget that. Whatever this thing is that I've been asked to take, that's, I guess, kind of important. Finally, after it was such a long trip, and then you get through customs at Krakow, and I remember it was 92. It had only just, the Iron Curtain had only just come down, so everything was still pretty grim. And I arrive at this hotel where they'd put everybody, and I've got 3 men standing outside in the freezing cold waiting for me. And it was Michael and his assistants, Michael, his editor. And he said to me, have you got that parcel? And I said, what parcel? And they said, the parcel that you were given to, to bring. I went, yeah, I've got, yeah, of course, yeah. Why, you need it? And he said, yes, give it to me. Oh, okay. What is it? And he said, it's only dinosaurs for Jurassic Park. I was carrying all the digital dinosaurs, all of that, with me by hand so they could get it into the edit. And can you imagine? This was CGI. This was the first time that CGI at that level had been seen by anyone, was Jurassic Park.
It's good you didn't lose the parcel.
Screwed up the whole thing. Could you imagine? Oh, it was like, why did you trust me with that? You're out of your mind. I'm just an actress. Please don't do this to me. Oh my God, So anyway, it was a fun story. It was a really fun story.
That's really good. Jurassic Park, I think it's one of his best movies. I love Jurassic Park. I absolutely adore this movie. And of course, Schindler's List, I watched it again a couple of weeks ago. And it's still one of his best pictures. Very important, historically important, of course.
Yeah.
And Hook is still a very fun ride.
I know. Isn't it great? Because Hook, you see, at the time, apart from the fact that, hey, I get to work with Robin Williams and Darling Robin, and it just, it still breaks my heart. It really does. But I just feel so honored that I managed to spend 6 months working with this beautiful, warm-hearted genius who taught me so much as well. It was my first Hollywood film, and it was $100 million. And I was so frightened. And I was old enough. I was 30, and I'd done a lot of theatre in the United Kingdom and in Australia, and I'd done quite a few TV things and a couple of movies. My first film was even with Tom Hanks, believe it or not. But so as an actor, I was ready, but I wasn't ready particularly as a human being for that extraordinary, massive machine that is a huge Hollywood movie, and everything that goes along with that, because everybody I spoke to or met was someone was a star, was someone I'd seen in the newspapers or on, watched their films. I was a fan. When I am faced with someone who I have huge respect for. I can't speak to them. I truly am tongue-tied. And what happens is I then become a bit flippant. So I remember, especially it used to happen with Dustin Hoffman a lot. I think he thought I didn't like him very much because every time he said, I go, oh, yeah, that's interesting. Because I just didn't want to seem like a sycophant. You know, they were just so lovely to me. And I think it did take me quite a lot of time to relax into it. And I was always fine on set, but it was just all the paraphernalia around it. And then I think I really just, there were just all these kids around, and Jim Hart, who still stayed such a good friend, who wrote it, who was executive producer, and his kids were there, and then Robin brought his kids, and so there was just a real sense of, it started to just kind of become like an amusement park. And we were on all these stages at Sony. The main stage we were using was the one they used for The Wizard of Oz. And I had such a sense of history that I was part of. And, you know, Neverland was the Wizard of Oz set. And so people would come and, you know, after a while, the word got out about just how amazing the set was. And people would come and visit. It would kind of be a thing that if you were in the know and you were able, you know, so Steven started asking me to show people around. Angelina Jolie was as a kid, came with her dad, and all sorts of people. And so I really got kind of used to everything. And then because we're in this big studio, there was the big props department, so we'd hang there. And so after a while, I just became a bit of a fixture. And then they started saying, oh, look, you know what? Julia is needed, but Robin's doing some green screen where he has to fly. Do you mind popping in and playing Tinkerbell, just sort of running her line so he can be an eye line? And so I'd pop into the green screen studio and I'd play other people. And even at one point, they thought about making it a musical. And I was given a song to learn. And in fact, the only bit of that song that's left is little Amber, who played my daughter, who sings this song. And she stands at the end of the ship as she's lost in Neverland. And she sings this lovely song that was composed, of course, by John Williams. And that's the only bit left. But they gave us all a bit to sing. And talking of sound, I had the good fortune to actually go into a studio with John Williams and a full orchestra and be in the booth and sing my verse of this song with John Williams actually conducting. I'm not a singer. I dread to think what they thought. I practiced and practiced and practiced, but I'm really not a singer, and I have no idea how I was, but I was so thrilled that it was cut out. You know, he composed a whole bunch of songs for the pirates and songs for this and songs for that, because the idea was it might be musical. But I think, you know, Steven decided, no, it's not going to be a musical. Although, of course, there's fantastic music in it. I mean, the music is amazing. So, yeah, that's another lovely, lovely memory. There are so many memories which, you know, you have to pinch yourself. You forget until someone asks you a question, you know.
And thank you very much for sharing these stories with me. I really appreciate that. And Caroline, there is one more movie I would like to briefly talk about. Disclosure.
Oh, thank you.
It deals with very serious subjects, actually. Sexual harassment, bullying, power abuse. To this day, the film remains very current, and you had also some really great and intense scenes with your co-star Michael Douglas, another veteran and great actor. What was your takeaway from this film, and also working with, you know, great actors such as Michael Douglas and, of course, director Barry Levinson?
Oh, wow. Yeah, thank you so much for asking me about Disclosure. I couldn't agree more, and I think you're absolutely right. It's so current, and I think what's interesting is that people also seem to have forgotten that there was really around that time a real conversation about sexual abuse and abuse of power, because, of course, there was the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings. He had been accused of sexual harassment, of course. And it was just the early 90s was a real period of this. There was also a lot of women empowerment movies, if you think about it as well, from Thelma and Louise to Working Girl. It was a slew of them, and Disclosure, I think, was a part of that conversation that then seemed to somehow disappear, and now, of course, has come back in the wake of Harvey Weinstein. And when I was also developing The Bay of Silence, which also touches on these subjects in a different way, and talking to my daughter about it. And I said, but we have been having this conversation for a long time, and it got buried, and now it's back, and that's really interesting. And I said to her, you should see Disclosure. And your kids rarely see your films because they don't really like seeing mum on screen, because it's not the mum they know, although they love, she loves Princess Diaries. She's happy to see that. It's great, I think, to be able to remind people that, we're still fighting away. And that there have been great roles for women available that we were doing in the 90s. It's not new that women are, suddenly headlining things. Women headlined things in the 40s and 50s, huge movie stars as well. So it seems to be cyclic. But Disclosure, I was very proud to be part of. It was my first film using an American accent, and I have to say I worked so hard on it. And that, it was, from a personal point of view, that was a milestone, because prior to that, I'd been a little frightened of jumping in to do an American accent, and that cured me, which was great, because, of course, if you're able to do numerous accents, then of course there's more work available to you, which is really nice. Just different roles, and it's silly being in America and not being available for American films. So that was great, coming so hard on the heels of these other three films that I'd done, and then White Squall after. I had a really nice run in the 90s, as they say, because, as Steven so rightly said, you get put on the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. And until you have a major flop, you're going to kind of probably continue going along. And of course, they were very happy for me to always be the wife of someone. So I almost ran out of superstars to be the wife of by the end of the 90s as well. But I loved working with Barry Levinson. He works in a very different way to, say, for example, Steven or Ridley. Michael was utterly charming and totally professional, and he'd just come out of a pretty bad personal situation himself. So it was interesting. He was sort of having his, Basic Instinct had been huge. He was just exceptionally easy. But it was one of those films, because of the timing of the schedule, where I really felt I dipped in and out, unlike Hook or Schindler's List, where I felt very much part of it. And that was partly because we shot in Seattle, and we also shot in studio in Los Angeles in Warner Brothers. And of course, we also had a very, very big star in Demi.
Yes.
And so, I was number 4 in the list. Of course, we also had Donald Sutherland.
Yes.
So I have 3 really huge stars doing, magnificent work. And again, I'm the little engine that could, running along to catch up. So my scenes also were, I felt I had to arrive, and I had 2 weeks solid work, very, very intense, get all those scenes done and get them right. And then 6 weeks off, and then up to Seattle and do those. And that was all the family stuff. And it was a different kind of film too, It had a different edge to it as a result. But I'm very proud of my work in it. I really am.
Such a powerful movie and a really, really good one. And I often feel it gets overlooked for some reason. I don't know. I mean, it's a very, very well crafted and well acted movie. It's fabulous, I believe.
I think so too. Well, I think it's overlooked because basically the woman is the predator. And also, but also it's about AI and technology. That's what I think also is so fantastic. If you look at it now, you see the rise of technology. I mean, at the time we were shooting in Seattle, and there really weren't that many tech companies. And, the use of email and the use of gadgets and that world he inhabited where, do you remember, it was all big and open plan and kind of engaging, and there was the subplot with Aisha, and it was, very. I agree. I really think I think it's always been up there. I think people watch it, but yes, it needs to be looked at again. I couldn't agree more. I think it's really, really wonderfully done and wonderfully put together, and very smart film. And of course, it's Michael Crichton, who also wrote Jurassic Park.
Yes. Thank you very much for elaborating on that. And Caroline, before we talk extensively about the Bay of Silence, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, I just recently rewatched 3 movies which I would like to talk to you about just briefly. The Princess Diaries, White Squall, and also Cliffhanger. Princess Diaries, of course, it's a comedy directed by Garry Marshall. Cliffhanger, Rennie Harlan action movie. Everybody, I think, knows Cliffhanger. And White Squall, Jeff Bridges starred in it. You starred in it. Ridley Scott directed the picture. If you were to reminisce about those films, what is the most important lesson that you took away from shooting those movies, be it acting wise, in terms of working with the director, anything that comes to mind?
Oh gosh, I think actually with all 3 directors, complete openness. But I think that's true with almost everything you do. But I think also with those particular films, you just have to be completely open to whatever the day is going to bring for different reasons. Cliffhanger and White Squall were both what I would call extreme movie making. And I do sort of see extreme movie making as a very particular kind of film, because you really are battling the elements in a real way as an actor on those films. And so therefore you have to have extraordinary grit and resilience and be prepared for anything that could happen, because literally from the point of view of Cliffhanger, you could have a landslide, an avalanche, and you could be down the bottom of the mountain covered up in it. And the same on White Squall. We were on a tall ship that we did 2 weeks of rehearsal before, where we learned how to climb up to the top of the mast, the ratlins, as they call it. It's pronounced ratlins, but it's spelt rat lines. And the best way to go up them is barefoot. So you get this burning on your feet underneath. We learned how to sail that ship because there were times, because of the way we were shooting, that you couldn't have the captain of that ship actually at the tiller. And there is, in fact, one scene there with a Cuban gunboat where I am at the tiller. I had been told to kind of hold it hard to starboard because the wash from the Cuban gunboat that was at port side was so massive that, we risked the ship, just going round in circles. So I've got lines I have to say, and I have to look, a certain way, and I've got to be emotional because, of course, it's the Cuban Missile Crisis at the same time, and yes, we're terribly worried that we're going to be killed. And at the same time, I'm thinking, oh my God, I got to keep, my arms are killing me. But also then the DP said to me, oh God, just make sure also that the sun is always coming through the sail. So make sure that's happening as well. So I then got him, and I can see him out the corner of my eye looking all worried every time the ship kind of moves. And I'm thinking, this is just bizarre. I'm here with, I think I've got how many people's lives in my hands right now, and I've got a camera on me, and I'm trying to shoot a scene that's going to end up in a movie. But actually, I'm much more worried about the fact that I don't, I make sure everyone survives. So there is it's extraordinary when you find yourself in that situation. So as I say, extreme movie making. On White Squall, also, we really needed a storm. And we really needed to pretend it was a storm. And we were in Malta, and Ridley had organized it so that in the tank, not only did we have these wave makers that dump, hundreds of thousands of gallons all at the same time to make the waves, but he'd gone and bought 5 sort of Boeing aircraft engines, and had lined them up around the big tank, the water tank in Malta, to create wind. And they were not only freezing, but also the wind from those, engines was huge. And then the ship was on a gimbal, so it turned, so it went down under the water and then back up again. This is all for the big storm sequence. And there was this one scene where I'm hanging off the side of the ship, and I'm saving one of the boys who's gone in. And so we're doing this scene, and of course the gimbal is going left to right. So anyway, we shoot a couple of times, and Ridley's puffing on his cigar, of course, dry, behind the monitor, on the side of the, whereas we're all soaking wet. And I went over and I looked at the monitor and I said, and he didn't seem happy. And I said, what's wrong? And he just said, look. And I said, it doesn't look dangerous enough, does it? He went, nope. And I said, I'm on the second bottom rung. What do you think? And he said, well, up to you. And he said, the divers are there. Now that we had 2 divers down the bottom, who were there waiting in case anything went wrong, who were supposedly going to save us. So I got ready for the next shot and climbed down this ladder. And then I went down one more rung and I'm hanging on, and then action, and it's moving and it's going left to right. And of course, I'm so much deeper in the water at that point. So I'm yelling and screaming, and he's hanging on from his thing, and I managed to kind of grab in it. Of course, it looked better. But at that moment, I lost my hold on the holding on the ladder. And I felt myself going under the boat. Okay. And I couldn't breathe. I didn't know which way was up. And I just grabbed again and somehow grabbed back onto that ladder and was dragged back up again as the boat, lifted again out of the water. And in fact, I look at that and you can see the cut, and you can see there's a cut where my hand literally you see me falling off, and my face goes, there's a kind of shock, as I go. And then the next cut is I'm back on the ladder and I'm dragging him in. And I remember crawling to the side and just feeling absolutely terrified, actually. And everyone was like, you okay? And they brought me a towel, and I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. And then I looked at Ridley and I said, so you got it, right? And he looked at me and he went, yeah, I got it. And that we never said another word. So asking about those movies, you have to be ready for anything. And extreme movie making, it could be serious. When you're talking about a comedy like Princess Diaries, again, the thing about Garry was he just loved to keep shooting, and he'd never turn the camera off. And he had 2 writers who would be on set writing jokes. And I kid you not, their names were Marty and Marty. So you had Marty and Marty, and they would just write the jokes, and then they'd hand them to Garry. And if Garry liked the joke, you'd be in the middle of a scene, and he'd call out over the top of the camera, "Hey, hey, Caroline, say this," and he'd tell a joke, and I would just have to kind of catch that joke, turn it around, and then tell the joke in the middle of the scene. He did it to everybody. I mean, Anne Hathaway was freaking brilliant at it. But my problem, of course, is I'm doing an American accent. So I'm hearing this and I get it. But, you know, I'm at one remove. I have to then turn it into, you know, out of his Brooklyn accent, out of my, you know, and into my kind of standard American accent. And wasn't super simple for me, I have to say. That's something I really remembered. And then he just loved to shoot to the middle of the night. He didn't care till 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. He'd just keep going. And I do remember I share a birthday. It was within about 3 or 4 days. It's me, Julie Andrews, and Anne Hathaway. And so, of course, they're all very sweet, and they bring cakes. And I think Julie is just a bit after me. She might be the 14th. I'm not sure, or 15th. I have to check. And it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and we have yet another happy birthday to you, and another enormous cake coming in, which means we all have to stop. Julie's got to blow out candles. Everybody has to have a piece of cake. The whole crew stop. And Julie just turned around and looked at me, and she said, "Oh, God, please, no cake, no birthday. I just want to go home to sleep, please." And she said it under her breath because we'd been through it the day before. There was my birthday or something. It was Anne's birthday. It was like, we can't eat any more cake. And it was so sweet, but it was always 2 o'clock in the morning. He was fine. He loved it. He could work all night. so yeah, they're just fabulous, fun stories that
Great.
Stay with you, and then you thank you. I haven't thought about them in ages.
Great, and thank you very much for sharing them with me and our lovely audience. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And Caroline, now I would say let's dive right into the Bay of Silence. I hope you're not burned out on talking about this movie yet.
No, not at all. I could talk about this movie forever. It's very different when you've written something and you've produced it. And I lead produced this, actually. So my producer credit is a little bit more than what people think, in that I do feel a personal responsibility for this film, and I am the last one standing. I'm the first one to stand up when we started it, and I'm the last one standing because I'm now doing the marketing and distribution, and it's me. I sign everything, but I have wonderful investors and wonderful senior lenders, and we have, of course, the British tax credit, and we have the Netherlands Film Fund, and we got the Liguria Film Fund, and 4 fantastic investors as well, all of whom are American. So it was all kind of done properly, like a proper independent film, but it's not a studio movie, and we are pushing it out in the time of COVID. And it's a beautiful film. I love my actors so much. I am so grateful to Clace Bang and to Olga Kurylenko and to Brian Cox, Alice Krieger, Asad Boab, the beautiful twins, the Butinasevas, Shalisha, James Davis. We just had such lovely people. And our director, Paula van der Oest, and brilliant DP, Guido van Gennep, and of course my composer, John Swihart. I can go on forever. And they all just believed in it with me, because I felt if I was going to write my first film and spend all this time making it, I wanted to make a film that I would hope would really resonate with people and would last, and that I, of course, could be proud of, and was a film that wasn't easy, and is about important subjects that, we are part of the national conversation even now, so it is about sexual trauma, it is about abuse, it is about the death of a child, it's about guilt, it's about loss, it's about grief. It's got some tough subjects in it, but it's also a love story. And I really loved the book, The Bay of Silence, which is written from two people's point of view and is about mental health as well. It just stayed with me for many years. And I met Lisa, the writer, and said to her, I do believe there's a film here. You write so visually, and this central moment, this central episode of the death of the child and the decision he makes regarding that, which is something that I think we can all relate to, is haunting. And will you give me the chance to maybe write something? But I think it has to be a thriller. I think it has to be a mystery thriller in some way, because a drama is hard to sell. And I think you've got some Hitchcock elements in this book, and some mystery elements. And they're the films I really love. And two films that inspired me and have always lived with me are Don't Look Now by Nick Roeg,
Yes.
and The Vanishing by George Sluizer. And both those films have resonances in the Bay of Silence, because Don't Look Now is about what happens to a couple after the death of a child that they have such trouble dealing with, and the guilt. The Vanishing is the story of a man searching for his lost fiancée and what happens there, and how far down the rabbit hole he's prepared to go to find out the truth. And The Bay of Silence, in a way, has both those elements. And it also has a feel to it that is a little bit throwback, which is what I really love about those films. Those films are 70s and 80s movies. And I do think that period was, in a way, the golden age of movie making, and right up to the 90s, I think, because we didn't have so many visual effects that we could rely on. Films were more character driven. We weren't into big spectacles with Marvel comics that we knew that we could sell around the world, that were easy to translate so that we'd get the big global audience. We wanted and were interested in stories that were about human beings. And that was a story I wanted to tell. And I knew it would be tough. I don't tick any boxes, in that, I'm a woman of a certain age. I'd never produced before. I wasn't intending to direct it, because quite often they would like you as a first-time writer-director. For some reason, I wanted someone else to direct it, and I did want a woman director. There were loads of parameters that I had. It's just like, and I thought, well, I better do this boots up, learn from the ground up. Yes, I'm fortunate that I know people, but often knowing people can even be more of a barrier, because you don't really want to ask those people to help. The people I knew were people who were so up there in their journey, that you didn't really want to say, hey, you know what, I'm thinking of this. So I just kept my head under the radar. And I just thought, well, I'll just try this on my own. So I did a business plan, and obviously I wrote it, and I went around and I met sales agents, and I went to the film markets, and I did producer courses, and I wrote letters, And in between, of course, I was acting, and sometimes I would have time off, of course, in hotel rooms in between acting jobs. So I was able to push, my, writing and producing ideas up the hill. And slowly it got to a place where I was able to get a bit noisier about it and send it out to actors and ask them if they were interested. And it started coming together. I started packaging it. I started realizing that how to market it. And one of the ways to do that is by making sure that you have a fairly tight finance plan and budget. And I realized going into those meetings with very bored sales agents at Cannes or at the EFM or at the AFM, that if they'd say, "Oh, tell me what the story's about," in that sort of rather tired voice. And I'd lean forward and I'd start telling them the finance plan. I'd say, well, I've got 30% investment from here and 30% soft money and tax credits and grants from there, and 30%. And then suddenly their ears pricked up and they looked at me as if, hallelujah, here is someone who actually talks our language. And that was a real revelation to me. And I realized I needed to put the creative and the fiscal together as a filmmaker. And lots of lovely serendipitous stories. My husband is Terry Gilliam cinematographer, and he was making Don Quixote finally after 20 years, the second one, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote with Terry Gilliam. And he said to me, Olga Kurylenko is a lovely actress. Why don't you send her the script? And I said, wow, yeah, what a great idea. So we slipped her the script and she read it and she said, I love this and I would be really interested. And I was in Cannes and I saw The Square. And I saw Clace Bang in the Square and I thought, there's my William. Because I didn't really want a very British William, even though it's a British movie, because the problem with British actors is we are so class-oriented. It's very hard to find a classless actor. And the great thing about a Danish actor who speaks excellent English like he does, or an Irish or a Scottish to a certain extent, is that they're slightly classless. English actors aren't. They're either posh or they're working class or they're this. We have. I don't know if you have it in Germany, but we're so stratified with our class system that we just place people in boxes by their voices, how they sound. There are so few British actors who are available, who are also bankable, because they're also busy. So you spend your life talking to agents and saying, oh, well, could you tell me about so-and-so's, no, sorry, booked up till, 2021. So you go, okay, well, I'll cross you and McGregor out. And the great thing is that Clace was just, and he'll say it himself, coming into the international eye. And, huge success in Cannes, but the Americans hadn't quite cottoned on to him. And his agent, he had a British agent who I happen to know, lovely guy called Simon Sharkey, whose father had been my agent early on. And Simon also actually was a very good writer, and I'd been in a TV show he did. My casting agent said, well, just ring Simon up and see, I said, golly, okay. So I rang Simon up and I said, is Clace Bang available? Do you think he'd be remotely interested in reading this? And he said, well, I'll read it first. And he read it. And he said, yes, actually, Clace might find this interesting. And he reads everything. So he sent it off to him. And Clace was on his way to Toronto to promote The Square at, TIFF. So I was on my way to Toronto as well to have yet another conversation with my sales agents about this film. And so I arranged to see him there, and we had such a lovely kind of quick, brief cup of tea. And he said, "I love this. It's great. So, yeah, if you want me on board, I'd love to do this. I want to do an English-speaking film." And so I then had Clace and Olga, and of course I had Brian, who is a little bit of a actor magnet anyway. And Brian, I've known since 1985 when we worked together at the Royal Shakespeare Company in Misalliance, where he played my dad. And he's been a family friend ever since. And Brian was my secret weapon because everyone wants to work with Brian Cox because he's the actor's actor. So when I told Olga and Clace that Brian was probably going to do it, they were like, "Oh, you're kidding me. Okay, well, we're on." And fortunately, Brian was so generous, and he had a little bit of time in between Succession because that was about to start series 2. And Brian never stops as an actor anyway. I mean, he's always busy. And he managed to fit me in. He came in, he did his 9 days. And it was just wonderful because he was the perfect actor for that role as well, because with Brian, he's never been identified as one kind of character. He is, as he says, a moving target. So you never know if he's a bad guy or a good guy. So he'll either be in a Marvel movie, or he'll be a hero in this, or he'll be a bad guy in something. And of course, now, everyone sees him as Logan Roy, and of course, he's a bit of a baddie. What's also wonderful is with 2 Emmy, the Emmy nomination and the Emmy win and the Golden Globe and everything, is that when the movie was coming out, and with Clace having done Dracula and now doing Northman, the interest in this little movie is greater, which is lovely. And of course, Olga, everybody adores, and she's so good in her French films as well. And people forget she's not just a Bond girl. She has, worked with extraordinary directors. Terrence Malick, Into the
Yes.
Wonder, Terry Gilliam. She's a big French star and makes also, very deep art movies. She's a consummate actress. And so it's just wonderful to have someone of her caliber
Yeah.
playing this part, who is so naturally beautiful that she doesn't need to wear any makeup. And she has no vanity, Olga, which, for a woman who's an ex-Victoria's Secret model is just wonderful. She really doesn't care. So I've been on movies where, oh my God, the amount of time that someone is in makeup is ridiculous, and you think, will we ever get them out? And with Olga, she's just always there. And, her hair was rarely brushed because that was the character she was playing. She was playing an artist. And she wasn't wearing designer clothes. We had these sort of throwback clothes that were really a bit kind of odd, almost sort of secondhand, which she chose herself. She said, "I think this is what she wears." But she and Clace and Brian, all 3 of them, have this archetypal Hollywood movie star look, which is just like your Jimmy Stewart or your Rosalind Russell. And that's what we also needed for this film, because we were also shooting it that way, shooting it like a Nick Rowe sort of film, like, we inspired by Bad Timing and inspired by, Polanski, inspired by Visconti. That's what we needed from those actors as well. It has a Hitchcock feel, and we really wanted to go for that feel. And if you look at the movie for a second time, you will see all the little signposts that, in a way, are little homages also to Hitchcock, whether it's the MacGuffin of the suitcase, or whether it's the Gothic house on a hill, or the whirling seagulls like the birds, and of course the twists and turns. Some people say there's maybe too many. I'm just so delighted, really, that what we attempted to achieve, which was a commercial mystery thriller with an art house heart, which also talks about art and madness and how far you would go for your art, what you do. And I do think there is a conversation as well about that. The idea that artists are supposed to be subversive. And interestingly enough, this is something that I think is also sort of very German. And one of the things, we have a photographer in this movie called Raven. And it was what he was trying to do to push the envelope for his art, where we cross a line, where Rosalind is involved, and this involves her past and her childhood, which is what catches up with her by the end, and what Will has to discover. And I actually was looking at, a lot to do with artists, Helen Vine, for example, who you may know, who is Austrian. If you look at his work, he uses his daughter, and some of it is really disturbing. And I met him once and went to his studio because he'd moved to Los Angeles, and these extraordinary, enormous canvases. And I asked him, I said, how does your daughter feel about the way you use her in these photographs? And he said, she finds it quite amusing, really, and, she plays. Of course, I'm talking about someone who went further. And if you think of Joel Peter Witkin, who actually, of course, is American, and what he does, using, almost dead bodies and things. But and Robert Mapplethorpe, and these guys are lauded, and I do believe their work is extraordinary, and they are, again, subversion is very important for an artist. If Michelangelo hadn't gone into, the mortuaries to draw, which of course was heretical at the time, but he needed dead bodies to be able to look at the sinews and muscles and to be able to draw them. And there was a very enlightened bishop, I think, who gave him the key to the mortuary, the church mortuary in Florence. And he'd sneak in there at the dead of night and look at the bodies and draw them. And, so we have a long history of accepting that artists are allowed to cross a line. But it's also a conversation that I think is worth having. How far are they allowed to cross the line? And then when you also add that into whether it's in, Harvey Weinstein and, those kind of situations, I do think it's really powerful and really interesting. And, topics to tackle in movies like this.
Yes.
That's kind of a lot. So we did spend quite a lot of time discussing tone and how much and what, but I just thought, well, let's just give it a go. And, it's not going to be like, we're not going for, who's that very famous German director?
Rainer Fassbender, do you mean him?
Yes, thank you, Fassbender.
Got it.
Of course, yes. And I mean, I have to say, when I first started the movie, and, I was almost thinking along those lines, are we going to go as dark as that? And then gradually you think, no, if I actually, I am not a transgressive German filmmaker in the 70s, I'm, I think probably trying to go there is a little ambitious, and I probably don't want to, and I don't think my sensibility is that. but I wanted to touch on it as well, and that's what I'm hoping, that The Bay of Silence touches on all, these topics, as well as being a linear 3-act structure that also has got great performances and is quite thrilling and at times, a little shocking.
And you've got a great cast there, and Brian Cox, I always enjoy watching his performances, be it The Ring or Red, or let's say the autopsy of Jane Doe. And
that's done amazingly, that film, hasn't it?
yeah, it's a really, really decent film. Absolutely, I liked it.
Yeah, because it was a sort of, I think it was sort of a low budget sort of horror movie. When you look at it, you go, okay, it's basically one location, really, really clever. It's got sort of supernatural sci-fi elements to it.
Making films of this kind is very difficult, actually. Films that take place in in one room. It needs good writing, good dialogues, good actors, needless to say, and this film is really, really good. Caroline, if we still have some time left, I would like to talk about the mechanics of filmmaking just a little bit. You being the hands-on producer, could you please walk me through, the time script development began until post-production, also principal photography, and how you experienced the administration of filmmaking, so to speak?
Okay, gestation was lengthy, partly because, of course, I had, what I call my day job, which is the acting, and I have 2 gorgeous children. So I would say it really properly kicked off but when I managed to attach everybody, which we're talking about 2017, 16, 17. And that was when the money started coming together. I always had about 30% or 60%, and then something fell out, and then an actor wasn't free, and of course, director. And again, I feel bad because I was talking about the movie, and I wasn't talking about Paula van der Oest as a director, who, of course, is so important. And, her vision that she brought to the film is what, pulled it all together. So what happened was, I am sitting, it's 2017, and I'm in, it's 2018, beginning of 2018, and I'm in Berlin at the EFM, and my sales agent says to me, okay, director, because I just lost a director who had to go and shoot War of the Worlds. And he said, what about a woman? I said, oh, thank God. Because I've been putting women directors in front of you, and you've just sort of not been noticing them. And I would really love a woman director. And he said, who do you think? And I said, well, here's my list. Paula van der Oest, I had met about a year before through my casting director. And she was in LA, and we just hit it off, and we had dinners and chatted, and then she ended up staying in my house, became a friend. And I'd asked her to read the script, and she said, I will, but I'm actually quite busy. And then I sent it to her again, and I said, please read this and let me know, because I really think the money's coming together, and this is the cast, and I know you're used to casting yourself and writing your own material, but please just give it a go. And she read it, and she called right back, and she said, actually, I do have a window, and I do love those actors. And I think, the film is certainly, is in my wheelhouse. She'd directed a film called Tonio, which is about the loss of a child. She'd directed Black Butterflies, which was about a poet who was bipolar, so she understood all of everything that we're talking about. And then it came together very, very quickly. At this point, as a producer, I had managed to get the money on board by 4 major investors who provided 30%. Then that meant I could go to the senior lender, and get a loan against the tax credits and the pre-sales, which is very important for an independent film. You have to show that you're market ready, and we had pre-sold 13 territories. Which is terribly important, which meant that we had 30% of the budget as well from pre-sales to other countries. So that is kind of the rule of thumb, and then you have 10% gap. It's terrifying because I'm signing my life away. There's no big TV company that's, handing me a check. There's no big studio handing me a check. And I had to crew up. I had to be bonded because I was a first-time producer, and of course all independent films need to be bonded, and the bond was very, very strict and very tough, and also gave me a list of people that I could employ for production. So my line producer, and then obviously a co-producer who was going to be the physical producer, whose name was Jason. Paula brought on her partner, Alain de Levita, who is extremely experienced, and the Netherlands Film Fund, which was wonderful. So we were able to get a tax credit with them, and we did the post in Amsterdam, and we were able to bring 5 of Paula's team with her, which was very important, which was Guido de Van Genep, her DOP, her editor, Sander Vos, and script supervisor, Harry Ameland, production designer, and first assistant camera. So that was great. And I knew we needed to go to, the locations were incredibly important because they really are like characters in the story as well. The Bay of Silence is in Italy and is a World Heritage Site, and it's in Liguria, and it's about 2 hours from my home in Tuscany, and I knew it well, and I'd read the book actually in The Bay of Silence, and fortunately I'd met some years previously a young producer who actually was born there, and he said, if you ever make this movie, you have to make it with me because it's my town. And I said I'd be delighted. So I rang him up and I said, Fabio, it's on. And he said, oh, great, when? And I said, July. And he said, oh, no, you can't come in July. It's the season. And I said, I know, but it's only for a week. And it's the only time we can do because the actors are all busy. And I don't know what to do because the bond says if we don't come to you, then we're going to have to try and find it somewhere in England, and it's impossible. Or I'm going to have to come down and do plates, and that's just awful because, Anyway, so he gripped it by the handles. He said, okay, we'll see what we can do. And then we couldn't go to France because we only needed a week. So we went north to Scotland, and we found just wonderful locations up there for Normandy. And so that was our 3 locations. And we had 6 weeks to do the prep. And I was closing finance at the very same time. And it was exhausting and 24 hours a day. But at the same time, I didn't have enough money. And we had a currency shortfall. And they told us we couldn't go to Italy. And I get a call offering me a job to do 6 days during June and the first week of July. And we were actually going to start shooting on the 9th of July to shoot a movie called The Islander in Croatia. And it was only 8 days, but they needed it spreaded across because of their schedule, and mainly weekends. And I said, yes, because I thought, oh my God, I can actually go and shoot a film. I can earn some money. I can put it into my budget, which of course is terribly not kosher. Producers aren't supposed to do this sort of thing. But I just thought, how else do I get to Italy? It was just enough money. It was it was amazing. This has happened all the way through this movie. Just when we needed just a little injection of cash, I get a call. My agent goes, do you fancy doing this? So I don't know many people who work as an actor and are producing a film at the same time, a different film at the same time, but that was me. And so I'd leave on Friday afternoon and I'd shoot Saturday, Sunday when everyone else was having their weekend. And then I'd be back on Monday evening when everyone else is in the office having had their Mondays. And of course I was on the phone all the time. And now, of course, we do everything remotely. So the fact that I thought it was strange that I wasn't sitting in an office doing everything.
Yes.
But it was great. So then I was finally able to, say, look, there you go, and to put that down for Italy. So then production itself, so many stories. I woke up every single morning thinking I was boxing an unknown opponent because so many things happen, so many fires have got to be put out, location changes, weather problems, issues, rewriting scripts. But actually, and extreme heat, believe it or not. Can you believe that we get to London and we have got this garden for this big party, and we've found the perfect big back garden, and it goes on forever, and it's beautiful and it's green, and we'd had such extreme heat that we get there and the lawn is yellow. It's like, how's this happened? We're meant to have this sort of, everyone knows that gardens are green in England. It rains all the time. It was like straw. And I remember when we got to post-production and we get to the grade, and I looked at Guido and I said, do you think we could kind of green up the grass a bit? And he looked at me with that sort of disdain that cinematographers often have for stupid people. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, it's just so yellow. He went, oh, for God's sake. So he looked at John Tilburg, his colorist, and he said, what do you reckon, John? And John was very, it's amazing when they do this, it's like on a computer, and, they just kind of outline a whole swathe of things, and then they click a button, and then suddenly everything just looks a different color. Production was 6 weeks. It was at breakneck pace, and so much was going on. And as a producer, it was a huge learning curve for me because, of course, I had help. But I kept, it took a while for me to realize that the buck did stop with me as well. And there wasn't anyone that I could look over my shoulder and say, so what do you reckon? Should we say yes? It was like they were coming up to me saying, so look, do you think we can keep those extras on? And I really, we need an extra day because this scene didn't work. And how are we going to do that? And look, we're running out of time. And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. We better keep the extras. And then you realize it's coming out of your contingency, which is basically your pocket. But in for penny, in for pound, I slowly just sort of became more just happier and happier. And I would say a huge plus was the fact I'm an actor. So my big thing was I want my actors happy. And I've been on many, many sets where production's a bit of a muddle. The actors get a bit lost. There's not enough time for rehearsal. There's not enough thought going into what the emotional quality of the scene that they have to prepare is, because, you're moving cameras around, you're changing lighting, you're preparing, props for a scene. There's a bit of a hubbub and noise, and the actors are just standing there, putting their fingers in their ears, trying to concentrate. And I do remember being really clear as much as I could about that, and even having a couple of fights with my line producer because, of course, we're shooting in London, which is incredibly expensive. So we found ourselves in West London, Ealing, and trying to find all the locations around there. And we got a cricket club where, all the production buses and utilities were. And that's where they wanted to leave the trailers for the cast. But the house was a 10-minute drive away. And I said, well, where are they going to sit in between scenes? Because they're not going to be driving constantly back down to the cricket pitch to change costume and everything. It's just a waste of time. They might even get down there for lunch. But since the lunch bus is up, why am I spending, so much money on a trailer for a start that they're not going to be using and they can't be comfortable in? We need to bring it up to be close to the house. And they're like, yes, but the parking, and we're never going to get permission. So everything is logistics, and everything is logistics plus. There's always a problem with, well, why can't we move that there? Oh, because we can't store it, or we don't have the permission, or we don't have this, we don't have that. But anyway, we did manage. We got some very nice neighbors who allowed us to park these great big star vehicles, they call them, trailer dressing rooms, into their front yards. And I don't think the actors actually realized how much had gone into making sure that they were comfortable and could just walk straight out and go and prepare and sit somewhere and, be private. But that's something that I've always been very aware of, because I am an actor. And British filmmaking, for some reason, tends to be a bit higgledy-piggledy. And everyone on top of each other, and a bit of, yelling and shouting, and it's like, no, let's not do it like that, please. So yeah, there were, and I think I probably put a few people out that way, and there were times, you'd realize someone was stranded, one of the younger actors who, suddenly you said, why are you has no one got you a ride home? Oh, no, it's all right. It's like, why don't you have a ride home? And of course, it wasn't in the budget, because it wasn't in their contract, because they weren't, they're only coming in for a day or two. No, that's not okay. So, of course, the Uber account, because you just have to look after people. And it's not, the artists and the crew. In Italy, I remember our grips really weren't happy at all with their accommodation. And they came up to me after the first day, and I said, look, I'm so sorry, but you have to realize we are in a World Heritage Site in the height of the tourist season, and there are just no hotels. And they went, no, don't know, Caroline, it's really not going to fly. I'm not staying there. Because the Italians had put them into La Madonnina, which is basically one of those hostels that's run by nuns. And they are like little rooms that are tiny, and they're actually terribly clean, and they're rather lovely. But the nuns have a curfew of 11 p.m. And so, of course, the grips were not having that, because after they'd wrapped, they were going out, and they're in Italy, and they're going to have a couple of bottles of wine, and they were going to walk around town. And so they had to climb over the wall to get in on their first night. They're thinking, what the hell? So on day 2, when, of course, I'm meant to be doing other things, I'm finding myself driving around in my little Fiat Uno, looking for hotels. And thankfully, because I speak Italian, because, I live there, one of the assistants said to me, oh, I've got a friend who's got quite a nice, it's a bit in the hills, but it's really nice. You should check it out. And, 90 euros a night. Because, of course, the other problem is we've got a budget. So I'm driving up the hills and find this lovely place, and they're so nice, and they had 4 spare rooms, and they were all beautiful, and then they had a big terrace, and of course I think it was the World Cup or something, so of course the most important thing was that they were all, they needed television so they could watch the football. So I said to them, okay guys, I found somewhere, take a look, it's certainly better than the nuns. And I tell you, they went up there, and then I ordered a minibus so they could get back, daily. They had the best time. After that, every day it was like, hello, Caroline, what can we do for you? And do you need anything? We're having a lot. And they were just lovely. Spike, he was so great. And, he needed to look after his boys. There were 5 of them, and grips. It's a tough job. They're pushing the camera. They're holding up reflectors.
Yeah.
They're wading into water. We shot in the water, and they're wading into water up to their armpits, doing things. They work really, really hard. And then, of course, we got into the edit, and, Paula then went away to edit for 12 weeks. We're making our notes, and I found that really, really fascinating, and also a bit scary, because movies are written 3 times, or well, they're written many times, but you've got the script, and then of course it's rewritten in production, and then it's rewritten in the edit. And then when you finally decide that you're going to lock your edit, then of course you're going into all that post with sound mixing and ADR and the grade. And I have to say, I just loved that part of it. That was so new to me, and I found it so creatively refreshing as well. Seeing the bare bones of a film suddenly live with sound. And sound was incredibly important in this film. And Alex Bowie, our wonderful, sound editor, who had done Girl with a Pearl Earring and is incredibly well known in Holland, has got a really wonderful outfit in Amsterdam. And in that true Dutch tradition, they're all very relaxed, and it's democratic, and everybody has lunch around a very long brown, sort of scrubbed table, and there's, places to play ping pong and, all that stuff. And, a great big mixing studio, which is just wonderful. And he also does Foley in a very interesting way. He gets the actors in there at the same time, and everyone is sort of doing the Foley almost together. It's very, very interesting. You have those 2 weeks or so or more, you go back and forwards, and it's refreshing because in a way it's out of your hands, and you're just coming in and you're listening and watching, and you're sitting there in the dark and you're steeped in the film. And of course that's the point as a producer and a writer, where you see all the holes and worry endlessly about the end product and will it work. And, also you become incredibly precise because you're looking at scene by scene, reel by reel, and as well when mixing the music as well. And with John Swihart's music, where do we come in? Where do we fade out? Should we just hold a note, isolate it, and take it from one scene to another scene and keep it going so it gives us the continuity of storytelling? And I always find that so fascinating, which is the editing gives you the continuity, but also you do that with sound as well, and also creating texture and creating tension. And there were times when you're thinking the tension is dropping. How do we keep it going? And sometimes it's just one note. And we went back and forwards. I remember on the central sequence where Will discovers, and I'm not doing a spoiler, he discovers his son is dead. And the music for that whole sequence is so important because the sequence actually is terribly, starts. It's sort of like beginning of Act 2, and it starts as he drives to France. And then basically it's a good 20 minutes, really. And there were long conversations about, is this one long sequence, or do we see it, is it sort of in 3? How do we tell this story this way, sound-wise? We thought, no, it is an arc that has to go all the way through. So there were, things that John did with the music, that just melodies that would come back again and again, that would help kind of stitch it together, as it were. So it's subliminal.
How early on did you bring in the composer, John Swihart? How much time did you actually give him? Or were you able to give him?
Well, interestingly enough, Paula's composer, Fons Merkis, actually unfortunately had a heart attack. And it became obvious that it wasn't going to work. Was he going to get better? The insurance company basically said, we can't wait. John Swihart is a wonderful composer. He's American, and I had shown him a cut of the film when I had been in LA in November, and he really enjoyed it. And he said, if you don't have a composer, I'd be very interested in having a go at this. And I said, really? Wow, thank you. And I said, well, we do have a composer. Then in January, I kind of rang him and I said, guess what, John? I don't know how busy you are, but would you like to have a look again at this film? Because we need a composer. So he came on board. So in fact, we then extended the edit, actually, because of various, issues, from sort of more the kind of marketing and, the commercial side, then decided they had to have their input. He started in about April. So, generally, I think a composer should have 16 to 20 weeks, or longer. It should be about the same time as your post-production schedule, really. But some composers come on even earlier, even during the shoot, they're looking at dailies and having a think.
Yes.
But the important thing for me was there is always that conversation about, is this going to be a score in its entirety that is the composer's score? Or are we going to have, that sound editor who also is then going to be inserting pieces of music? And we now think contemporary movies, there is so much music that is chosen, that is not specially for the film, but is chosen and is licensed because it provides a story background to the film in some way. It's also in terms of, soundtrack albums and everything else, they're always looking at how that could work. And I felt, because this film had a bit of that sort of throwback 70s feel, that we actually wanted something very clean, and we wanted a single score. And there's only two other songs in this film that are just background in the party. And actually, they are composed and written by a musician friend of mine, Brian Cox, in New York, who works with an interesting Portuguese band called something de las Puertas, and it's sort of upbeat, sort of samba feel, kind of new, just different. And it works for the party scene, because I wanted music for the party that was bohemian in a way, but not specific. And so often they come up with sort of jazz scores for background party music because it's cheap and easy to get. And I just think, no, these people don't listen to that kind of music. And so I was sort of listening to Cesare Voria and all of that. And then Brian said, well, how about this? And it was perfect. And it was just so happy that also it could be a friend.
And the score is so important, and music in general is so important for the narrative of a movie, and that's, to me, that goes without saying. But schedule-wise, if you told the composer, well, we are able to give you 16 weeks, I think they would applaud, actually, because oftentimes they will have to deal with tight deadlines, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, sometimes even less, sometimes a bit more. So they would be happy, to have 3 or 4 months to write and record a score. But for many guys, that's luxury.
I kind of felt that he didn't have enough time. But also, John is, what saddened me was I wasn't able to be there, because I had this great idea, which is, fantastic. We can both sit in Los Angeles, and I can go over to his fantastic sound studio, and I can walk, and I can take my coffee, and I can sit and listen, I can watch. And I just thought, this is just the best. But in fact, because it was June that he was really kind of getting into it, by the time we locked, I mean, you know, you really need it when you're locked, that he had gone to the East Coast because he has an East Coast place. And so everything, of course, came down the line. You know, we read our comments and we did everything remote. And I was just like, oh, this is so sad. And I would say if I do have any regrets, I think maybe it did need perhaps a song at the end, something to take us out, because the ending is unusual and poignant, and it might have just needed a little bit of upbeat for the end. And that was the only time I thought, yeah, maybe we should have gone to someone and asked for that. But you know, we're not a studio film. You know, this film looks so huge and big, and it's done on a shoestring. And I just take my hat off to everyone involved. Truly a shoestring, and it just looks like a studio film, and it's been reviewed as if it's a studio film. You know, which is on one level, you know, really, you know, I'm very touched. You know, we got Hollywood Reporter and, you know, Variety and, you know, the reviews have been polarized. We've had some really amazing reviews. Variety was like a love letter to Clace. And, you know, we've had a few that, you know, found it tricky and, you know, but the fact that a movie that it's been treated as if it's a studio film, partly, I think, because of the cast and the director as well. And you kind of want to put your hand up and say, look, we didn't have 30 million to chuck at this film, like that other one you just, you know, trashed. You know, the budget of this film is about 30% of your average HBO episode of Game of Thrones. And people don't understand this now, that movies are the poor relation, independent films are the poor relation now to television. Because television is, you know, this new golden age of television that we have. There is so much money thrown at it, it's crazy. And so much time to do an episode. An episode is 4 or 5 weeks. Well, that's what we had to make a film. And an episode is what, 50 minutes?
Yeah, 50, 60. Yeah.
And it's long form, and you won't have so many locations because, you know, you're gonna use those locations again over 10 episodes. So you know, it's just, it would be lovely as well if people would understand that it's apples and oranges, so much of this. And independent film really deserves to be understood better, I think, in what we're trying to do, in the commitment that everybody is giving to it, and the budgets that are getting sliced and diced because, you know, the market is, you know, offering less and less. Anyway, this is a whole other, you know, other discussion. And I actually do feel very privileged to have spent 30 years in this business, started as an actor. I've always written. And in fact, I went to Hollywood and actually my first contract was as a writer because I've always written. And I'd written a script and somebody asked me to write something based on another novel. And I was actually paid. And then I got an acting agent, and my first job, of course, was Hook. So they then, of course, completely pivoted and decided that they were only going to promote me as an actress. Because obviously I was going to bring in far more money as an actress than I was as a writer. So it's so interesting that it took me 30 years to kind of come full circle. But I've learned so much, and I just do feel privileged that I've just managed to make a living in this industry and to have such insight into the mechanics of it and how it works. But at the same time, sometimes you want to shout from the rooftops, guys, you don't get it. Whether it's, you know, someone who's reviewing it or someone who is interviewing you because they like acting or they like movies. And they just think someone waves a magic wand and the money appears and you can choose whatever actor you want or whatever director you want. And
It's not that way, no?
no, of course it isn't. And I always find it fascinating when they say, if so-and-so directed it, this really could be quite interesting. A friend of mine who's another wonderful writer, director, shout out to Sheila MacLeod, because her movie's coming out in Germany. You should talk to her. It's called The Astronaut. It's got Richard Dreyfuss in it, and it's a beautiful sci-fi movie. And women directors are rarely, do sci-fi. She's obsessed with sci-fi, and it's a small film, Canadian film, made for $2 million. Richard Dreyfuss, Graham Greene. It's absolutely beautiful. And she said, she had a review, and one of the reviewers said something like, well, of course, if Alexander Payne had directed this film, and she went, but number one, Alexander Payne only directs movies he's written, and I wrote this. And number two, Alexander Payne has maybe 30, 40,000, maybe million to make his movies. And I had two. So it's like, I don't really understand why you're making this comparison. Alexander Payne has 80 days to shoot his film in. I had 28. And I just,
it's like comparing apples and oranges,
Completely it is. And, so those are the things, of course, that we can't talk about because, of course, no one cares. And in a way, it's true. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say. And yes, they have, I actually looked at Reservoir Dogs the other day. I've not seen that Tarantino film for a long time. And I was in Hollywood and met Lawrence Bender right at the very beginning of my career. And he was right at the very beginning of his. And he was trying to put Reservoir Dogs together. And I hadn't seen it for so long. And I saw it and I thought, my God, that was made on a shoestring. Extraordinary performances, extraordinary writing. There are some who, like a Tarantino, can just pull it out of the box. But, I think he knew everything he wanted to do with that. I think he begged and borrowed equipment. He probably actually, knowing him and Lawrence, they probably had just in their budget for free 10 times what the budget was in order to get what they wanted. Because, they were steeped in movies. And they were so prepared. So the prep time is so important as well.
Did you actually have final cut on this picture, or was it Paula's decision or the distributor's decision? What went on there?
I had a sales agent and a senior lender. So the senior lender and the sales agent act as the balancing side of the coin, because the sales agent have to sell it, and the senior lender is the guy who, of course, is underwriting the tax credits and the estimates against the future sales. So they put the bulk of the money in. And even though they know they're going to probably get 70% of it back pretty fast, there's still, a question mark over the rest. And so the cut was 50% my company, T-Boss Film Limited, and 50% them, which to a certain extent basically meant it was them. Because, and I remember when I signed it, and I didn't think twice about it, actually, because, of course, I didn't assume there was ever going to be an issue. But we did get into a little of a back and forth. In the end, Paula and I just, I said to Paula, look, we have a beautiful film here, but it's more art house than they hoped. And they really want a US sale, and they want a UK sale. They want a German sale, which actually we don't have right now. And we need to put some more suspense there. And she agreed. Her point was, of course, Look, and she worked so incredibly hard, and I just love her vision, and I love everything. But sometimes there's just technical issues that we had a freak storm in Italy, which mucked up our opening sequence with all the tunnels in Liguria. We didn't get quite as much as we wanted. We didn't get as much footage in Italy as we wanted. We had some issues with locations, and all of this has a knock-on effect if you can't then go and do a reshoot, or you don't have the money to do a reshoot. So she had to shoot a television series in the UK. So I said, fine, you have to go to the UK. Okay, well, let's just move the edit to the UK. Don't panic. We will get a UK editor, because her Dutch editor had just had a baby and he couldn't, obviously move. And I said, we found wonderful Paul Tothill, who had, was nominated for a BAFTA for Atonement, and who had also, he's Mike Newell's and Edgar Wright's editor, and he was free, thanks to Michael Hoffman, who knew him well and worked with him. And he said, you know what, maybe he's free, and I'll ask him to have a look at it. And he gave us a deal, and he said, yes, I'd be happy to continue. So with an extra eyes on the edit, with a more English viewpoint, because it's very, the script has a lot of subtext, English subtext, and that was one thing I was a little concerned, that some of the subtext of the film was being lost. Just because the cut would maybe cut onto someone else's face when someone else is finishing a sentence. And, that often happens with European co-productions when, you've got a mix, and I wanted a great mix, but also I had to accept that this was an English language film.
Yes.
So, no matter how good you are as English with a second language, like, the Dutch, speak perfect English, there are nuances that only an English editor might get. So I said, concentrate on the nuances of the script, concentrate on the storytelling. Paula is going to be in London, so that's perfect. So we did extend the edit a bit. So when you're asking about final cut, it was, we needed to do another cut. And I think it was the right thing to do. And the movie moves pretty fast, actually. I mean, in a way, maybe I think we could have put a bit more air into it. Now I look at it, but at the time you're never sure. The American sales agents it was very about, we need to get there. We need to tell the story.
Yes.
I think from that point of view, it does really work. And it's always, when you're straddling what we really said, this is a commercial film with an art house heart. And when you're straddling that, it's very difficult balance. It really, really is. But I think we got there. And then from what I'm seeing from the reactions and the people watching it, and the sales that we've had, and it going around the world, I really think that we got close to that balance. The performances, again, that was the most important thing to me. I said, as long as those performances aren't ruined by, any more scissors, and are only enhanced, then I'm happy, because this is character-driven film. Very few directors get final cut. It's always going to be, the distributor in the end, and the studio, or whatever the equivalent is.
The executives.
Yeah, that's kind of how it goes. But I have to say, I am so grateful to them, because they really were involved creatively. And David Gilbury, who, was our sort of financier at MFC, which is Media Finance Capital out of the UK. He's a producer himself, and he always said about this, he said, this film has my heart. He said, I'm deeply connected to this film. Whatever I can do for it, I will. It's not the kind of thing we do too much financing of.
Yeah.
They also did Bone Tomahawk, and they've done a lot of action movies. And he just said, but this speaks to me. And he just had a child. And so he was very, very involved and very cautious, I think, about not stepping over boundaries, which was great. And I really take my hat off to him for that, and to Todd, who was our sales agent at IFT, and to Dan Friedkin, who is one of my amazing investors, who I met through Clace Bang, and of course, who produced All the Money in the World with Ridley. So we had connections there, and he came on right at the end of the financing because I'd had some Chinese money fall out, and he was about to do his first film as a director with Clace, and he said, I need him. And I said, oh Lord, you want to start on the same day that I want to shoot, which was actually 24th of April. and he said, well, what can I do to help you? And I said, well, I'm going to lose my Chinese money, and maybe you want to read the script, and maybe you want to be one of my investors. And he was an absolute gentleman, and he said, I love this script and I will definitely do that. Every time it was about to just fall apart, some wonderful person picked me up. Cheyenne Kane, who has a major producer credit, Vigilance. When I called her and I said, look, Brian, we've got a slight problem, with Brian's dates and the financing, because we also now have to go to Italy. And she went, oh my God, you have to have Brian. I said, yeah, but also Italy is costing X. And she said, okay, how much more do we need? And so there was a real sense of involvement from everybody. The Oafs, who I met, who live in Texas, and I met doing a charity do and in Texas, and they were my first investors. They came on board because she read the script and just liked it and said, I've never invested in a movie, how much do you think, it's the least I can put in if I'm an investor? And I went, oh God. I thought, all right, 200,000. And she went, okay. Oh God,
Good.
that was my first 200,000. So there are so many stories, and I think there are so many strands. You can just carve it off and say, okay, here's the producing strand, and just see to it purely economically, and then you can carve it off and say, here is the creative strand, the writing strand. But I've kind of taken you through a muddle of the two in a way, but I think that's where I'm kind of privileged, and just hope it's useful.
What about the German distribution? Can you shed some light on that? It seems like we are the last country to have the film on a video on demand platform.
Well, I tell you why, and it's odd, but it's to do with the pandemic, because pay TV is such a, when the distributors look at a film, they're asking themselves, will I be able to put this on pay TV? And the advertising revenue has shot down so much,
yes,
that the minimum guarantees they're offering filmmakers for independent films is just really bad. And this is an English language film. Yes, we've got artists that, I think the Germans would really like. It needs to be dubbed. That costs money. It needs to be scheduled. There's topics in there that are not, necessarily immediately user friendly. It's not in that sense, it's an adult, sophisticated film. And if they're thinking, golly, maybe what's happening to our pay TV deals. And, unless the pay TV is paying up, they're a bit wary. So we're really hoping that we'll just get to that point where it works out, And that is something I do leave in the hands of my sales agents. But we've got, we've sold to Stars and to Sky and to Fox, Disney over in Pan Asia, and to Amazon, a big deal, Amazon in Australia for pay TV, because they're now in that market. So I'm really hoping that, the Germans will step up. France, we're doing a deal with, so it'll likely be Canal Plus. So, I'm really hoping so. And if not, we'll just have to do, a DVD and the VOD deal,
Absolutely.
a direct one. But it'll happen. That's something else, of course, that's on the list.
Great.
I've got a lot on my list.
I'm sure the German audience or the larger European audience is going to look forward to it. Caroline, I would like to thank you for taking so much time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate that. I had such a great time talking to you. It really means a lot to me. And I'm really glad we got to do this. I'm really happy.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for reaching out.